Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Hope all is well. Hope you had a pleasant weekend. I know we're going to start off this week really well because guess what else came in the mail besides the trades that were featured yesterday? That's right. History by mail hath returned once again. We are on, we are on the third or fourth of the American expansion thing, but we got here. Let's just take, something on the back. So we have a Treasury warrant for, is that $7.2 million? Treasury of the United States, Washington, August 1st, 1868, at site. I can't read that. It's very, very faded. Something New York there. And on the back, pay. I unfortunately cannot read any of that. If that's taken from the original document, so no doubt that is probably faded as anything. But that's cool. It's the first time we've ever got something that was that I can recall that wasn't full 8.5 by 11. Speaking of 8.5 by 11, what do we got here? Check for the purchase of Alaska. Oh, $7.2 million. Yeah, Seward's Folly. Enclosed is the Treasury warrant of the U.S. used to purchase Alaska from Russia in 1868. Governments used Treasury warrants to authorize large payments. With a purchase price of $7.2 million, America acquired nearly 600,000 square miles of territory for less than 2 cents an acre. That's a lot. So settle in. We're going to have fun with this one. Early settlement of Alaska. Russians began settling Alaska in the mid-17th century, and in the 18th century, cartographer and explorer Vitus Bering was commissioned, he of the sea, was commissioned by Emperor Peter I to explore the region. The Bering Strait, sea, island, glacier, and land bridge are all named after him. Did not know about the glacier or the island. I knew about the rest. The Russians wanted a sea route from Europe to the Pacific Ocean. Bering led the first Kamchatka expedition from 1725 to 27, mapping the northern part of the Pacific Ocean and providing evidence to the Russians that Asia and North America, were not connected by land. Bering also led the Great Northern Expedition from 1733 to 1743, mapping most of the Siberian Arctic coast and parts of the North American coast. The expeditions brought sea otters and beaver pelts back to Russia that were of such high quality that fur traders began to sail from Siberia to the Aleutian Islands. Shout out Canada and anybody who had to waste a lot of time in school there studying the fur trade for 17 years. Aleutian Islands. Russian traders with superior weaponry forced many Inuit and other natives to hunt for pelts, while Russian missionaries converted various native peoples to Russian Orthodoxy and taught them the Russian language. The name Alaska comes from the Russian version of an Aleut name meaning object to which the action of the sea is directed. That's an interesting word. A group of fur traders founded Russia's first permanent North American settlement in 1784. Emperor Paul I merged several fur trading organizations into the Russian American Company, or the RAC, gave it a trade monopoly over Alaskan resources, and directed it to create new settlements. The RAC set up several colonies, even as far south as Northern California. Did not know that. Russian colonization, however, only numbered an estimated 800 people at its peak. Alaska was difficult to reach, still is. Communication was limited, still is. And overhunting had decimated otter and beaver populations. I believe they're coming back. Beavers, maybe. I don't know about the otters. Treaty with Russia. Russia fought in the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856 against the Ottoman Empire, France, Britain, and Sardinia over rights to holy sites in the Middle East. After losing tens of thousands of soldiers in battle, the defeated and financially depleted Russians feared Alaska would soon be captured. Russia decided to sell the territory rather than lose it in another war, since the area was sparsely populated, difficult to control, and no longer lucrative. Emperor Alexander II hoped to start a bidding war between Britain and America over Alaska and publicized the offer to sell Alaska in the 1850s. Great Britain was not interested in the offer. Canada was not yet self-governing, and the U.S. was tied up with domestic disputes which would later erupt in the Civil War. You'll notice the date was 1868, so 3 years after the Civil War came to a close. When the Civil War ended, Alexander II, speaking of which, directed Russian Minister Eduard de Stockel, to approach the U.S. again. William Seward, Secretary of State under Abraham Lincoln and then Andrew Johnson, was receptive. There we go. The Americans, motivated by manifest destiny, words we don't like to see in history, but here we are because of it in an ironic way, saw a potential for natural resources, greater trade with Asia, and improving America's power in the Pacific. All three things very, very true. A deal was reached on March 30th, 1867 for the final sum of $7.2 million. With the purchase, the U.S. became roughly 20% larger. The Senate gave its consent, and President Johnson ratified the treaty on May 28th. On October 18th, a formal ceremony took place at Fort Sitka, in which Russian troops lowered the Russian flag and U.S. troops raised the American flag. Today, October 18th, is a legal holiday in Alaska known as Alaska Day, celebrating the day Alaska came into American possession. Though it actually wouldn't become a state until almost 100 years later in 1959. It took a year for the U.S. House, which was busy with President Johnson's impeachment, to appropriate funds for the purchase. The enclosed Treasury warrant was issued on August 1st, 1868. The warrant was made out to Eduard de Stockel, I think, and signed by U.S. Treasurer Francis E. Skinner. De Stockel endorsed the back of the check. Okay, so that would be his signature, right? Yep, okay, E. de Stockel. Okay, there it is. All right. Signed the back of the check and cashed it in Washington, D.C. at Riggs Bank, the largest bank in Washington at the time. A large blue stamp on the check is marked paid with the date. There it is. Paid August 1st, 1868, Treasurer. That's really cool. On to the back. The official treaty concerning the cession of the Russian possessions in North America by His Majesty, the Emperor of all the Russias, to the United States of America, say that 3 times fast, was written in English and French, the diplomatic language used by Russia. Now that's interesting. The treaty set up the geographical boundaries. The Russians ceded the right to all non-private property and buildings except for churches, which remained property of the Greek Oriental Church. Further, government documents, related to Alaska were to be transferred to the U.S. with full access given to Russia upon requests. Residents of Alaska could return to Russia within 3 years or remain in Alaska and become full U.S. citizens. The, quote, uncivilized tribes, end quote, were to be the subject to American law. Russian troops would evacuate Alaska and the U.S. would take possession of military posts. The treaty was signed by Seward and de Stockel. Please help me with that name. Some critics in America thought the purchase of Alaska was a waste of money and called the deal Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. Never heard that one. Meanwhile, Seward believed his greatest achievement was the purchase of Alaska, but it will take another generation to find out. Actually, he's not wrong. In Russia, de Stockel was similarly criticized and accused of taking bribes. He subsequently quit his job as diplomat and moved to Paris with his American wife, whom he had met while negotiating in America. All sorts of fun little fascinating things. Gold was discovered in Alaska in 1896. There we go, leading to a gold rush. The influx of population resulted in boom towns and thriving fishing, trapping, mining, and mineral production industries. Although Seward died in 1872, before the discovery of gold in Alaska, the rich natural resources later discovered would have vindicated him. And he did say a generation or so, that's not far off. In 1968, oil was discovered in Alaska, and in 1977, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline system led to an oil boom that has largely funded the state's budget, and I believe still continues to do so to this day. Alaskan statehood. From 1867, when Alaska transferred to America, until 1884, Alaska was considered a U.S. military district known as the Department of Alaska and was controlled by the federal government. From 1884 to 1912, the area became known as the District of Alaska and had its own government with a judicial and legal system. Interesting. Okay. I pause and then I lose my place. Where did I lose my place? Judicial legal system. Officials were appointed by the federal government and the capital moved from Sitka to Juneau. Is that how it's pronounced, Juneau? I think it is. In 1912, Alaska became incorporated as a U.S. territory with an elected legislature. Still, the federal government maintained control over natural resources, and the president appointed the governor of Alaska. James Wickersham, Alaska's delegate to Congress, proposed the first Alaskan statehood bill in 1916, but it would take over 4 decades to realize statehood. Support for Alaskan statehood gained steam after World War II. During the war, 3 Alaskan islands were occupied by the Japanese, and the U.S. used Alaska to transfer warplanes to the Soviets for use in repelling the Germans. Alaska was also a strategic asset for the U.S. military during the Cold War, with its proximity to the Soviet Union, China, and North Korea. Sorry, talking so much kind of drives me out. There were strong voices against Alaskan statehood that delayed the process. Private business owners who controlled copper mining, steamship, railroad, and salmon packing industries were a powerful lobbying force in Washington. Business owners did not want their profits to be hurt by the increase in taxes that the statehood would bring. Others enjoyed the sparse population, and still others feared Alaska could not raise enough in taxes to cover its population and would end up as a welfare state. However, most Alaskans supported statehood, and a referendum for statehood passed in 1946. In 1949, Alaska Territory's congressional delegate Bob Bartlett created the Alaska Statehood Committee and garnered prominent figures, including Eleanor Roosevelt, to publicize the statehood cause. Since Alaska was a Democratic territory, statehood bills were defeated in Congress on several occasions as Republicans feared the imbalance. In 1954, the U.S. Senate tied the Alaska and Hawaii, a Republican territory, statehood bills together. On July 7, 1958, Congress approved statehood, and on January 3, 1959, Alaska became the 49th state. The purchase of Alaska was the second biggest American territorial gain and changed the economic and military history of America. The first would, I think, be what we talked about. Oh, and there we go. This is the third of 4 documents in the American Expansion series. There's a link if you want to check that out. So it would have to be after the Louisiana Purchase. And so January 3rd, 1959, and I can't remember when Hawaii became the 50th state, but it was also sometime in 1959, I think a few months after that. But there you go. A lot more information about the purchase of Alaska. Did not know that about the Russians doing diplomatic business in French. All kinds of interesting stuff, and that's why we love it. History always providing new things. As they say, truth is stranger than fiction, and history may not be pretty, as I've said constantly, but we need to learn it. And actually, this one wasn't too bad overall. But so 3rd of 4 next month will be probably a hard one. Probably going to be a difficult one to deal with, but we will see. So until then, thank you so much for joining me. Hope you enjoyed some more History by Mail. We will see you tomorrow.